Good afternoon. Thank you so much for attending our first book talk of 2024. I'm excited to see that so many of you have a copy of Killers of the Flower Moon and the story of the Osage people and the birth of the FBI. Who would think that all of that could get into one book? But it has. So let me, first of all, introduce myself. My name is Deborah Deal. I am the Vice President of Friends of the Library this year, and I so appreciate your support and attendance today. And so I get the money part out of the way. Franny, our treasurer, is just outside the library at a table, and she will accept dues from you. Please note that our dues year runs from July 1 to June 30. So if you need to know if you are up to date on your dues, Franny can help you with that. So thank you very much for your support. And may I also ask, if you did not sign in when you came in the library, would you please sign in on your way out? It certainly helps us to count every single one of your shining faces that you're in attendance. So, now to introduce our panel today, Marcia Schultz, if you'll wave, Marcia. Marcia has lived in the DFW area since college, and for 30 years she taught at the high school level, including advanced placement U.S. history. During her time with South Lake School District, she began consulting for the College Board. So as a historian, she found Killers of the Flower Moon a fascinating book and wishes she had been aware of the events while she was still teaching. And can't we all, I don't know how many people were aware of these events before this book came out. It was just a very hidden part of our history, which we will talk about today. Julia Kellogg moved to Robeson from Milwaukee, Wisconsin in late February of last year. So she's one of our newbies, and three of her very close friends all built homes on the same street. Isn't that amazing? Julia has twice retired, once from Kohl's Department Stores, where she was Vice President of Merchandise Presentation at the corporate headquarters. Along with her team, she was responsible for layout of the stores and product placement in opening 1,115 stores in her 28-year career. Julia then sold real estate for 9 years before once again retiring and moving to us with Texas. Julia was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Her parents moved the family to Europe when she was just a toddler, and 15 years later she returned to the U.S. to attend college at the University of Oklahoma. And guess what? Like so many others, she had never heard of this history that is discussed in the book. And the lack of knowledge really angered Julia and got her passionate about this subject. So when she was returning the book to the library, Marcia Schultz just happened to be sitting at the front desk, and Julia talked about how much she loved it, and Marcia nabbed her to be a co-presenter for us today. So, that's
Don't
right.
ever come in between 9 and 11 on Monday, or you will be the next presenter.
Oh my goodness gracious. And last but not least, Richard Cushmal moved to Robeson with his librarian wife, Elaine, after 40 years of incarceration at Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas. Oh dear, I read the wrong bio. He gave me this bio first, and I told him he had to give me another one. So, okay, allow me to start over again. After retiring from a career in mechanical engineering and product development, Richard and Elaine moved to Robeson in 2015. His current interests include tennis, involvement with the Denton Poets Assembly, some of you might want to ask him about that, and he works as an election judge and clerk at our local election polls. He was pleased to be invited to participate in this discussion, and particularly in the Killers of the Flower Moon emphasis on the birth of the FBI. So I'm pleased to announce our panel, and I will let them begin.
We all have roots, one way or the other. Well, I'm going to start out by standing just so I can see you a little bit better. As a former teacher, you know, I can't sit for long, but I'm going to have to. My eyes have gone since I retired from teaching, so that now I have to get closer to my notes. But I'm going to start out just winging it. And I want to ask, how many of you have read the book? Oh, yay. Okay, maybe I should ask who hasn't read the book. Okay, that's good, and we hope that you will be so inclined to do so after today's presentation. And I'll put a plug in that we have at least 3 or 4 copies here at the library. I don't know if they're in right now, but they should be coming back in, I would think. If anyone's got it checked out, probably it was for this occasion. And you can read it. It is a fascinating read. How many of you have seen the movie? Okay. Well, we will probably discuss this at the tail end of what you think of the differences between the two. I think most people have some druthers as to whether they like the book better or the movie better, but I will just say that if you have to do one or the other, go for the book. Because like all books, you're going to get so much more information from the books. And I will say that I don't think Martin Scorsese really wandered too much. He did use a little literary license in some of his production, but I don't think he wandered too much from the truth. I know that the Osage, I've read reviews where they were very happy with the way that they were portrayed in the movies. So I think that says a lot for the movie. But we'll come back to that later. Okay, so just as a little bit of a introduction, I gotta watch my watch now because we don't want to keep you too long, or you'll get, I can get the hook and get her off here. But I wanted to start with just kind of showing you where we're going. As a historian, I taught history. My degree was in political science and my minor was in history, but most of my teaching career was history and AP history, which, if you're not familiar, that's like teaching college history to high school juniors, and it was probably my favorite part of teaching. They were absolutely fantastic, and I learned so much from my students as well. I taught for the College Board, and one of the things that I started doing for the College Board was teaching teachers different things to use, different techniques and all in the classroom. And one of my good teaching colleagues for the College Board was a gal who was from, and still is from, Edmond, Oklahoma. And she also, like myself, taught U.S. history as well as world history. And I will talk about her a couple of times because she opened my eyes to another event, which I will mention in a few minutes. As historians, we like to see history taught looking at the context of what's going on in our country or in our world at that time. And so that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to give the historical background, if you will, of what's happening with the Native Americans, the Indians. So if I flip between it, please don't be offended. Everyone has their different way of talking about these people. I don't think I'm going to call them Reds or anything like that. But there were different tribes, and we're going to be mainly focusing on the Osage, but I'm going to incorporate a few others just to give some historical background to set the context for this time period. Then Richard is going to be the kind of the expert guru on the investigation and the FBI in particular. And then Julia is going to fill in every blank out there because this girl is a research genius. And I will say, for future presenters, I hope some of you might consider it, the thing I've enjoyed the most was working with these two, because we bounced off of each other. We got ideas. The day that I met Julia, when she walked in here, I mean, she and I got up and we were angry and we were talking about what happened in the book. And you know, I made a new friend that day. And then Richard comes along, and he's everything I wish I could have been when I was a teacher, because I did not, you can see, I talk a lot. I did not use Smartboard, the PowerPoints, and so this was our genius here. And I will be forever grateful to Richard. I'm so glad that he got out of Leavenworth. All right, so with that, I'm going to play sit again so I can see a little bit better. But feel free, if you have a big question that just has to be answered, please raise your hand. I feel comfortable trying to answer it, and if I can't, one of these two probably can. But we will probably leave most of our discussion to the end so that we can get through. Since most of you have read the book, you are quite aware of how much information there is in this book. I mean, it's kind of mind-boggling, and we struggled even talking about it to keep all the characters straight. So Richard has done us a great honor and help with putting up all these different dates and timelines to keep us focused. Now, I'm going to go back before, see, I'll back up again. I'm going to go back before we get to 1785. In our very early history in America, there was a headright system. The term was not used the same way that we're going to talk about it when we get to the Osage. A headright was what they would pay a planter or a person coming to the New World, and I'm talking the early 1600s. If they would pay the transportation to bring over someone to work in the New World, now we're talking about the white man here now, he would receive a headright bonus, if you will, for land in the New World. And it was typically about, let's see here, 50 acres per landowner. So you can see that some of these people who really made a big fortune coming to the New World in the earliest years via the East India Trade Company or whatever had headrights, and those people that came were their indentured servants. Now some people might say slaves, because truly they were bound to that person for a term of usually 7 years in order to then get their right to have a parcel of land in the New World. And so this person paid for their passage. All right, so those were the early headrights. So when I first started reading this book, I was thinking, headrights, they're talking about headrights. And I went back to the only headright I knew about. Just to even give you a couple more what ifs, you know, here you hear all of the Oklahoma connection. My father was born in Mulkey, Oklahoma. This is just south of Tulsa. It is well, back then, I don't know if it still is, it was the capital of the Creek Nation. Now, the Creek tribes are going to be some of the tribes that come in from the southern part of the United States. His aunts, so my great aunts, 2 of them came out to Oklahoma Territory, not state, because, yes, you did. And please, because I'm gonna, yes. Because you can see here in 1907 is when Oklahoma, and it's like, I think the 46th state. So, I mean, it was almost the last of the contiguous states to come into the Union. Okay, and so they came and they were teachers to the Native Americans on the Indian property. Okay, so I had the connections, and so when I saw this book, I was beyond surprised that I had never heard of it. And my greatest disappointment is that my father has been passed away now for several years, about 20 years, and almost 20 years, and I never had an opportunity to talk about it, because I would love to say, Daddy, what did you think about what was happening just up in Bartlesville or Ponca City or Pawhuska or all these towns just north of him? So I'll never know these things. And so I'm a big proponent, if you haven't figured it out yet, of not whitewashing our history. And, you know, you may have a bone to pick with me, please don't do it in here. But I'll listen to you later if you'd like, if you take the opposite view. But it bothers me that sometimes people don't want to admit that we did some things in our history that probably weren't as kosher as we'd like it to be. Okay, so with that, I'm now moving on. The Treaty of Hopewell, so all right, we've got the initial headrights out of the way. The Treaty of Hopewell was signed in Georgia. Now I'm just going to give you some quick information. In Georgia, you had mainly Cherokees, and this was the first act passed that protected the Cherokee Native Americans by sectioning off their land, and they were given this land. Keep that in mind, because what is given will be taken away. Okay. Then I'm going to fast forward to the Louisiana Purchase, 1803. You know, Jefferson sends Lewis and Clark out. We purchase this huge swath of land that pretty much doubles the size that belongs to the United States of America now, and that's good, you know. But I'm sure it's crossed many of your minds as to, well, what about the people that were already living on that land? We took it. We had it, okay? We bought it from France for just a pittance of money, just nothing. And it was a great thing for the United States because we did get, you know, a lot of land for expansion later on. Now, we didn't need it at the time, but we had it. And I can look at it here. War of 1812 comes along. This is what's in history talk is, this is like the second U.S. revolution with Great Britain. We weren't quite sure that the British got the idea that we were split from them, and so to make sure that they knew that, we fought another short little war with them again in 1812 to 1814. And then, if you know the little song, you know, Andrew Jackson takes a little trip down the mighty Mississippi. Okay, he goes over there and finishes wiping out the British, and we win that war again. Now, the upside of that is that we've now got control down in the South, and Jackson in 1814, along with his forces, is going to start taking some other Indian territory. This is at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. I don't think it's up there. But this is against the Creek Indians. Remember the Creek? They're going to make it all the way to Oklahoma. The Creek, the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, there's another CH, Chickasaw, Choctaw, thank you very much. These are all going to be part of the Seminoles from Florida. these tribes are going to be eventually moved, and so in 1830, President Jackson, you know, because he had whipped up on the British down in New Orleans, is going to sign the Indian Removal Act, which gives plots of land west of the Mississippi River to Native Americans in exchange for the land that they had from Florida, Georgia, and all these other places. The Muskogee, which is another name for the creek, go to the land west of Arkansas. Okay, so now we're getting closer over here to Oklahoma. By 1838, a funny thing happens back in Georgia. Gold is discovered. And when they discovered Georgia's gold, there's only one problem. Anyone figure out what it is? Oh yeah, it's on that land that they had gotten back in the Treaty of Hopewell. So they just take it away. Take it away. They're going to pay them, but you got to move, folks. And so this starts. This is by now, it's under Van Buren. He's going to enlist the help of Winfield Scott, who will later make his name in the Spanish-American War, I think, if I remember them all. He starts marching the Native Americans, the Indians, westward. They're going to move them into what it will be called the land of Oklahoma. This is going to be Indian territory. Along the way, they're being marched at gunpoint, and they're going to be marched about 1,200 miles. This is what's known as the Trail of Tears. Okay, I've got a great audience here. I probably don't even need to be telling you these things. But more than 5,000 Cherokees, as a result of this journey, are you know, being transported here and being relocated. This is the Trail of Tears. Congress then passes the Indian Removal Act, the Indian Appropriation Act, and this creates the reservation system. Okay, so now they've taken these individual plots that the Indians had, various different tribes, and they're going to put them on reservations. They figure if we put them on reservations, that they can stay there, and we will be able to kind of control them better. Am I doing something?
No, I need Kate. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
There's another group down the hall.
Oh, okay, thank you. In 1868, the U.S. government and the Sioux Nation signed the Treaty of Fort Laramie. This is the only other one I'm going to mention, and then we're getting right to the Osage. The Fort Laramie in this treaty is going to be the Sioux Reservation up in South Dakota. Okay, well, do y'all know what happens up there? What happens? Oh yeah, well, and what, they discover some more?
Gold.
And silver. Gold and silver, and so boom, the miners are wanting to come in, they want the land, push the Native Americans away again. This results in the Battle of Little Bighorn, Custer's Last Stand, you know the rest. I'm not going to take you through any more of that. By 1879, the Carlisle Indian School has been created. This is going to encourage Native Americans to send their children off the reservations and become good little Americans. Okay, that means cutting all ties with their material culture, their social culture, their economic culture, just strip them of all that. This comes to an end, or reaches ahead, I guess I should say, in 1887, the Dawes Severalty Act. Think of severing when you break something up. they decide that together, the Indians on reservations, that's not working. So now we're going to break them up again. So they're going to sever. They want to sever them off and offer these Indians a plot of land. Excuse me, the Indians said, well, you know, we already had land. We had our own land. We could freely go and move around. No, that's not going to work anymore. The Dawes Act is by far one of the biggest mistakes the U.S. government probably made. It was trying to assimilate the Native Americans into the white culture. Now, many Native Americans will assimilate. Many had already started assimilating. A lot of the 5 civilized tribes, that was why, by the way, they were called the civilized tribes, was because they had assimilated. They were kind of like us, you know, for the most part, white folks. So, the Dawes Act was a huge mistake. Dawes Act will not affect the Osage because they had already lost their, they already had bought a section of land when they were forced out of Kansas. And they were in land, and you're going to see it on the next slide, I think, in just a moment. Well, yeah, you do, because you know what, we'll come back to the rest of that. So, let's move on. The Dawes Act was passed in 1887. The purpose, of course, was now to convince the civilized tribes to cede their land, and it was disastrous. The white settlers, and the railroads were the main entities that benefited from the Dawes Act. The government stripped 90 million acres and sold that land now that had been on reservations to non-whites. Non-natives. So the railroads could start plugging, because by now, of course, that's part of the contextual image here. Buyers would receive 160 acres. This was very much like the Homestead Act. But they would receive 160 acres in order to graze. They could get, 80 acres if they were just, if they were just farming. Problem was, Native Americans had never worked on a system like that, and they didn't know how to work within the confines of 160 acres, and sometimes that land was not very good for them. So they were not used to having the money, and they didn't know how to spend it in the first place, because they hadn't worked under those circumstances. Now, let me see if I can, I'm going over my time, so I've got to see if I can rush through some of this. Basically, now, like I said, the Osage were not subjected to the Dawes Act, but I mention it because of the horrible things that were taking place to other Native Americans at this time. What happened basically was that the federal government kept coming up with different ways to separate natives from their land. And so into all this comes the Osage head rights. By the end of the 1880s, or around, going towards the end of the 19th century, they started the land that the Osage had, and now you're going to see, if this is too small for you, the Osage, thank you, is right up there. It borders with Kansas, and really where the purple line, where it says Pawnee is going across, that's about where Tulsa would be now. And then you see the creek right below it, but you can see there's Kaw, there's Ponca, there's Pawnee, there's Cherokee, they're surrounded. And they were being subjected to these land allotments. And so what the government said was that they would have head rights. Now this is a new kind of head right. This was something that, since they already owned their land, they weren't being given separate portions. But they came up with an allotment system where they looked at, in 1906, I believe, yes, in 1906, they took a census, if you will, of how many Native American Osage were on their land. And that number came to 2,229. So they divided the land in kind of in name into allotments, and each owner of a head right had the right to the benefits that would come off that land. Now, the land, we're going to soon discover, is full of oil. And they're going to just have a little sniff of that, knowing maybe that's going to come to that land. But they don't know that yet. Oil men are going to start coming in and wanting to drill on this land. They would allow, they had a mineral council, they would allow these white businessmen to have the rights to the land if they would pay them X amount. That X amount went to the Osage tribe, and the monetary benefits, if the oil struck and it was a successful well, that oil would then pay off huge benefits, as we're all aware. And so then it would be divided into 2,229 sections of money for each person. Those head rights, the right to have the mineral rights, and by the way, that had been already determined prior to 1906, when they said the Osage don't have the right to just sell away the land, but they have the right to all the oil or gas or coal under the land, the mineral rights. We still have mineral rights today. I inherited mineral rights from my great aunt who lived in Oklahoma, and I get royalties about, not as much as they used to be, but about 3 or 4 times a year.
Marcia, had they not, the Osage were very cunning in their ability to negotiate with the government to have that oil and all the minerals go back to them, because they technically owned the land, they bought it.
Yes.
Where some of the other tribes had not bought the land, they were given the land. So they were very cunning and very smart in that way, and of course we know what happens, but that is the case. Right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely, and they knew it. I mean, they had the forethought to do this, to work this into an agreement, not even aware that there was oil in our hills. And so there were. Well, the only problem was that the white businessmen felt like these people could not handle doing business, if you will. And so they said, well, we will allow you to have this money, but you're going to have to become a ward. They saw the Native Americans, the Osage, as being incompetent or imbeciles. And so they said, only, and the more Osage blood you had, the more imbecilic, I guess, if that's a word, you were. And so they were going to appoint guardians for these wards. And so you're gonna find that it was very rare for an Osage to have, to be able to make decisions, any kind of decisions, without consulting his or her guardian. But they were wealthy people, and they became very wealthy.
So in 1925, I thought this was interesting, a guardian,
Can't hear you
We
back
can't
here.
hear you.
Can't hear you.
See, she wasn't a teacher.
So in 1925, in doing some digging, a quarterly headright payment would average around $3,350. Okay, so back then, that was quite a bit of money. The individual that was to receive that money would only, if they received it, receive $1,000 of it. $1,000 of that $3,350. The rest of it went to the guardian.
So if they were so smart to be able to get to keep their land, why were they not so smart to let these greedy people, white people, take their hit rights?
The government was the one who instilled that there would be guardians over them. So it was a governmental policy.
Was this a court case? Was this a judicial appointment of the guardians?
I think this was done through the Bureau of Indian Affairs,
Yes.
which was a government agency.
Just dictated.
Yeah. Okay, and I'm spending way too much time, but I will just say that by the 1920s then, the Osage were, per capita, the wealthiest group of people in the world. Per capita. Now, we have some pictures here. This was actually from a Salt Lake newspaper on the occasion of Oklahoma becoming a state in 1906. That says 1907, I'm sorry, 1907. But you can see, this is a street in Muskogee, Oklahoma, which is just, a stone's throw from Mulgee, up in the same area. This was, I think all of these are, well, this is the Broadway, this was the, there we go, Broadway, that's Oklahoma City in 1907. I mean, that's a pretty fancy schmancy street. This is a female institute, I'm not sure what it was, but this was in Muskogee. An Oklahoma ranch. And what was this one? Oh, a private resident. I mean, look at those homes. They were living, as my daddy would have said, high on the hog. And they had the finest clothes, and they were already, dressing for the most part like the white folks, because, after all, that was kind of, it just said wealth. And, let's see, okay, I'm almost through here. So, this practice of the guardianship was very racist. And the guardians were well-known, well thought of leaders of the community.
White people.
White people, absolutely, white people. And they would pocket some of that money that wasn't theirs really, but I'm sure they, said, well, I'll take care of this for you. But they also, the ward had to ask permission in order to buy anything. And the guardian had could, and then many did, say, well, you need to buy from, Joe Smith's trading company over here. Well, Joe Smith happened to be his best friend. I mean, this was graft. This was corruption. And you think, well, that's just horrible. Well, yes, but folks, let's look at the big context now. That's what was going on in America at that time. So, with that, I'm going to, I want to finish. Can we go back to the timeline for just a few more things? So just to give you the rest of the big picture of what's going on at this time. In 1898, for 3 years, yeah, I think it was 3 years, sorry, a little lax on my numbers now. The Spanish-American War took place. We won that, if you're not familiar with it. We got the Philippines, and we got Guam, and we got Puerto Rico, where it all kind of started. But we said, well, the Spanish started it, and well, folks, if you were in my class, you would have said, probably not, because, I mean, the Spanish had nothing to benefit from starting a war with us. We were more powerful than they were at that time. That would be a stupid thing to do. But I think it was more that we wanted it, that America probably wanted more land, because by now we're wanting to expand beyond our borders. We've already got the Louisiana Purchase, and the Mexican war with Mexico's over, so we've gotten, you know, California, Arizona, all that land. Now we want to move on, so we're already expanding. But when we expanded, you see a lot of racism there in the Spanish-American War. And I say that because that's going to be something we're going to be talking about. Let's face it, folks, they were racist towards the Indians. We were racist towards the Filipinos. We called them, and I remember the day my principal came by and said, you know, Marcia, you don't need to say those things when other people are around. I know what you're teaching, because I went to Panama and all these places, but we referred to them as our little brown brothers. And it was our reason to go out and to help these people and bring Christianity. Well, that was fine to do that, but not to treat them inferior, but rather to bring them in and to be equal with us. Well, so that's the context going on. Also, World War I comes in 1914 over in Europe, and there's a lot of racism there between the Germans and the other countries involved in the war. And as a result of that, we see a lot of immigrants coming into America, and that really blows us up, because then we start having all kinds of anti-immigrant, oh wait, that's going on now, okay, anti-immigrant, and trust me, I know we've got a problem, but I'm just saying, these were the attitudes of Americans, was that, you know, we wanted to be better. The Bolshevik Revolution takes place, and we get darn scared of all people who are different from the Northern Europeans that founded our country. And so the Bolshevik Revolution causes a lot of raids under the Attorney General, sorry to say Arnold Palmer, Mitchell Palmer, and they're called the Palmer Raids, and they are blowing up buildings in the LA Times and things of that nature. And then, last thing I'm going to say, then you'll be tired of me, I'll leave. And then a riot breaks out in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Another thing I did not know early on when I was teaching. In 1921, between May 30th, I think, and June 1, 2 maybe, there is a race riot in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was never covered. My friend, my colleague who taught in public schools in Oklahoma said, never heard of it before. It took place in a section of Tulsa that was known as Greenwood, and Greenwood was was referred there as the Wall Street for Negroes. Okay? A group of people were not happy that this group had a lot of money, and so, and you know, lynching was going on at this time also throughout America, particularly in the South. And it is started by the white citizens of Tulsa. It wipes out, burns out, I don't know, let's see if I've got any details here. It burned and destroyed 1,400 homes, all African-American owners. 10,000 people in Tulsa were left homeless. That's in 1921. This story that we're going to be looking at picks up about that time, okay? So that's what's going on in America. It's not just a isolated case in Oklahoma. Oklahoma is reflecting what's going on in the rest of the country. And with that, I'll pass it. I'm through. The hook is here.
All right, so both Marcia and I are so appreciative of Richard and what he has done with this presentation. And one of the things that kind of floored us and we were so excited is he created a timeline of events that really lay out the book. And at the very top of the timeline, it really kind of covers, I'm not going to go into any of the things that are at the top of White. It's really more what's happening with who's in office, what's going on in the government. Richard's going to talk more or less about, obviously, the FBI portion of it. But I think what's interesting is that you really start to see, when you start to lay out the timeline, the reign of terror unfold itself. So, you know, obviously in 1907, Oklahoma becomes a state. Marcia mentioned about the oil drilling auctions that happened kind of around the 1912, 1913 period. And then Ernest Burkhart, you obviously all know about him, he of course marries Molly. And I think what was interesting, and I dug this up, and I thought this was an interesting article that I was able to go down a rabbit hole on one day. And what it was is an article that was written about this time, and a lot of these articles were published all over the country. In Washington State, up in Montana, and this was about how much money the Osage tribes were getting off of their head rights. And so this is what was written, which I thought was really kind of fascinating. The tribe's oil wealth attracted hordes of white, marriage-minded suitors. Single Osage women became objects of hot pursuit, prompting a flood of letters to the Osage Agency seeking oil-rich brides. Sight unseen. This individual, his name was C.T. Pilmer of Joplin, Missouri, wrote a typical article of, "I want a good Indian girl for a wife. For every $5,000 she is worth, I will give you $25. If she is worth $25,000, you'll get $125. So in doing some additional research, Gran, the author of this book, one white woman married to an Osage man told a reporter how locals would openly scheme. A group of traders and lawyers sprung up who selected certain Indians as their prey. They owned all the officials. These men had an understanding with each other. They cold-bloodedly said, you take so-and-so, I'll take so-and-so, and I'll take these three. And that's about taking them on as their guardians. They selected Indians who had full head rights and large farms. So then, as you see in the red, the reign of terror really starts. So Mary Lewis is kind of what we've been able to find in doing some research in 2018. She is killed by a bogus heir, Thomas Middleton. I think she was shot. And then in 1921, unfortunately, Anna Brown, Charles Whitehorn, Lizzie Kyle, which is, of course, Molly's mother, and Joe Bates and Joe Greyhorse all die. Followed by 1922, William Stepson, Anna Sanford, Joe Bates. 23, Harry Rohn, Rita Bill Smith, George Bighart, and the Paul Morrison. And it's just interesting because, you know, these were happening, and as we all know and we all read or saw in the movie, they really couldn't get any traction on who was causing these murders. Well, and in some cases they thought they just died. There's so many that the Osage don't know if they really died of a heart attack. Did they really die of influenza, or were they poisoned? And so with falsified records that were done by doctors and you know, just really taken advantage of by the community, it is really now through word of mouth, through the Osage and their stories, that they're still talking about it. So you think about it, this was something that happened in the early 1900s. Families are finding out about their stories 98 years later. They might think that one of their loved ones died of this, but they actually died of that. And that is murder. So Sybil Bolton dies in November of 25. I will plug it now. I can also plug it at the end, but Dennis McCullough, he wrote The Deaths of Sybil Bolton. I just got this book. You know, Amazon delivers daily. Really great story. She was shot point blank with her 16-month-old daughter playing outside in the front. Irony of all of this is that in her death, her daughter, right, so the one that was 16 months old, at 2 years old, received her first head right. Her white father took her over, because obviously her mother had died. She grew up knowing that her mother had died of a lung disease. She was 67 years old when she found out that her mother had committed suicide, because that's what was written in the legal documents. Interestingly enough, they believe they have proof that it was her guardian, who was also her father-in-law, shot her point blank. So, interesting as you kind of go down, and there's other names up here who perished at that time. And the ones that are in white that are highlighted are individuals, obviously, that tried to help the Osage, but were also murdered for their knowledge, for their attempt to try to do the right thing. So this is just, the next slide is just some pictorial. Again, we didn't know if everyone had read the book, but here is Minnie. Minnie was also one of the sisters of Molly. She died of a wasting illness. Of course, she was poisoned in 2018. Beautiful woman. Anna, we all know about, unfortunately, Anna, gunshot, age 35, back of the head. And here's Lizzie, the mother, of course, poisoned. And, you know, of course, we all know that Molly went through this incredible heartache in a very short period of time. And I have to say, I think she had to have been an extraordinary woman for what she did, for what she went through. And I think it's fascinating because she lived across 2 centuries. She was born in 1880 in a teepee, or a hut kind of
she becomes this very wealthy woman who wants to be in white society, has the tea parties, it's not ostentatious with her money, but clearly wants to try to figure out how to fit in. And, fortunately for the timeline, it is discovered fairly late, but she is saved. She was being poisoned as well, because all the head rights were moving up to her as her sister and her mother passed. Bill Smith, Rita, by the way, sister, of course blown up in their home in Pawhuska. And I believe their white maid, that was their live-in, perished in that as well. And then I think the next one is Molly Burkhart. Yeah, she dies in 37. There is a YouTube, I was telling them, it's been crazy. I'm so glad today is here because I've gone down so many YouTube rabbit holes, I call them. And I found one today. I didn't get to see the entire one, but it is it's OSU hosted, and it's David Gran, and they are doing a questionnaire, and a lot of the ancestors, the Osage ancestors, are on stage with him. So I didn't get to see the whole thing, but if you are like me and this is fascinating, definitely you can find a lot on YouTube. There's a lot of really interesting paths you can go down. And Henry Roan, which we were, when we were talking about when we would meet, we've met several times prior to today. We believe Henry Roan was in the movie, living on the ranch with Hale. But that doesn't come across in the book. Obviously, we know that Hale was very invested in him from the insurance standpoint. But we thought it was interesting, like, what did we miss in the book? And we all three of us kept trying to look and find it. But in the movie, that's how Scorsese depicts him as a role in that film. So I believe from here, I'm going to hand it right.
Can I just add one thing? It dawned on me, I don't think I said, the head rights for the Osage could only stay with an Osage. So when you start seeing all these people dying suspiciously, they're all those head rights are going, in Molly's case, she's now getting the portion that belonged to her sisters, to her mother, and Burkhart marries her knowing that she's going to become a very wealthy woman. That's the only way that they could not transfer them to the white people. They had to stay in the family, to this day, the Osage head rights, there are still head rights that are owned by the Catholic Church, some Protestant churches in and around Tulsa and that area. The Drummond family in Pawhuska, like Reed Drummond, okay, her husband's family were some of the largest owners of head rights, and still they have the head rights. So I'm sorry, I forgot when I was talking about how head
The
rights.
University of Oklahoma has head rights. There's a, did you say University of
Stanford University, I think University of Texas has head rights too.
Excuse me, are they the owners of the head rights or the guardians of the head rights?
They must, I'm not sure. Good question, let me see, I'll look while.
I just, again, because you said the head rights stayed with the tribal members, so that's why I asked the question.
I think
Yeah, how
they changed it legally.
legally, I
Okay,
Changed it
all right.
legally where the Indians were able to get their own head rights deed, because Molly, before her death, got that.
Right, but they're trying, right now, they're saying you can't return it to the tribe. I think it has to be with some entity other than the tribe itself. Let me see if I can find it while.
That's okay, I just wondered.
That's a great question.
So I'm going to talk about the investigations. Henry Roan is kind of how the investigators got a toehold in this whole thing, and working from his death. But before that, I want to give a brief history of the Bureau of Investigation. And by the 1900s, the urban areas had significantly grown. There were over 100 cities with populations of over 50,000 people. And therefore, there was a lot of violence, corruption, crooked political machines, illegal monopolies, and in the technological revolution of automobiles, it became easy to buy and sell cars, steal cars, easy to move about the country in violent crime sprees. There was also a threat of anarchists banding together in small groups motivated by ideology bent on bringing down the governments that they hated. 1901, McKinley assassinated, Roosevelt became president. Roosevelt had a strong belief in the law and enforcement of the law. 1906, he appointed a like-minded reformer, Charles Bonaparte, as Attorney General, and he is a nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, I believe. Quickly learned that his hands were tied and having very limited resources to conduct his investigations. So he borrowed operatives from the Secret Service. Then Congress passed a law in 1908 banning the use of Secret Service investigators. So Bonaparte went out and hired 9 of his previous borrowed investigators and 25 others to form a special agent force. And this is considered to be the birthday of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. In 1919, the first identification order, number 1, was issued, the first wanted post, which became a staple of crime fighting in the days. 1917, Congress declares war. At that time, though, however, U.S. laws were insufficient to protect the U.S. from subversion and sabotage. So then Congress turned around and enacted the Espionage and Sabotage Acts and gave responsibility to the Bureau of Investigation, putting them into the counter-spy business. There was a need then to protect America from domestic subversion and international espionage and sabotage. The war ends, and there's a globally inspired turmoil in the U.S. There's widespread labor and economic unrest, a wave of intolerance and injustice spread across the U.S. against communists, radicals, and labor union groups. 1919 to 20, anarchists launched a series of bombings, Marcia mentioned those, across the nation, and this created a full-blown Red Scare. Attorney General Mitchell Palmer then launched a massive investigation led by a young Justice Department lawyer, J. Edgar Hoover. This led to the Palmer raids, Marcia mentioned those, poorly planned and executed and heavily criticized for infringing on the civil liberties of thousands of people that were swept up into the raids. And we entered a new era of lawlessness, and it's just beginning. So this is a timeline on one of the earlier investigation. William Burns was head of the Bureau of Investigation at that time. He was a former private detective. July 21st, Bill Smith presented some of his suspicions. He was one of the, he later died in that explosion with his wife. He presented his suspicions of these murders to the local authorities, specifically Sheriff Freeze. Molly Burkhart Whitehorn family, W.K. Hale, all offered $2,000 rewards for an investigation into these. That would be equivalent to about $64,000 today in each, for each 2,000, $180,000. Hale hires a private detective, Pike, because Pike's in his pocket. Anna Head State hires a detective, and Whitehorn Estate hires a detective. But then about that time, February of 1922, Wayne Stepson dies by poisoning. He's a very healthy rodeo, a young man that performs in rodeos, but he dies suddenly of apparent strychnine poisoning. And then the Osage prevail on Barney McBride to go to Washington to plead their case. Well, he's murdered on the trip. Barney is a friend of the Osage. He's an oil man, but he's a friend of the Osage. In spring of '23, Osage had a resolution seeking Justice Department help, and Burns dispatches an agent to the scene who concludes that the investigation is useless. Then a local attorney, W.W. Vaughn, offers to help. He is thrown off the train and murdered on his way to Washington.
He was on his way back from visiting somebody in the hospital.
Okay. I stand corrected.
Good move.
Summer of '24, Calvin Coolidge, the new president, dismisses Burns and appoints Harlan Fisk Stone as Attorney General. The Bureau of Investigation persuades the governor of Oklahoma to release Blackie Thompson. He's one of the suspects. I think they're thinking they'll, get cooperation and information from Blackie. But he promptly turns around, robs a bank, and kills a police officer. Then, in December of '24, Stone selects J. Edgar Hoover, head of Bureau of Investigation. And because this whole thing is already a mess at this point, Hoover washes his hands of it, turns it back over to the state.
How old is he?
23. So it's not getting the Bureau off to a good start. He just kind of kicks it back to the state. Finally, September of '25, Tom White is designated to command the Oklahoma Field Office. And that little white mark up there, that indicates Tom White's term, how long he was there in the investigation. It was just a year, mid-25 to mid-26. Looked into Tom White a little bit. He was born in 1881. He was age 43 at the start of the investigation. He's from Oak Hill, Texas. Anybody know where Oak Hill, Texas is? I was curious, so looks like it's just outside of Austin. It's southwest of Austin, now a suburb. He was the son of a Texas sheriff, Robert Emmett. His wife, Margaret. He also had brothers in law enforcement. He attended Southwestern University in Georgetown. Anybody go to school there? This is what image of it from the edge of the campus looks like. He enlisted in the Texas Rangers in 1905. 1909 to 1917, he was a special agent for the Santa Fe and Southern Pacific Railway. He joined the Bureau of Investigation in '17, was with them through 26, and then 25 to 26 he was assigned by Hoover to command the Oklahoma Field Office.
I heard something today on one of the podcasts that White and Hoover, he was afraid when Hoover called him into Washington because Hoover was a shorter man.
Give her the microphone.
Yeah.
And he did not, Hoover was a shorter man, and he did not like men that were really super tall. And so Tom White was like 6'2", so he was called in thinking he was gonna get the axe, but he actually got the job. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
So Tom White's approach was to go undercover, and he had this team called the Undercover Cowboys. And one of them was John Berger, who had been involved previously, and he worked openly with Tom in the investigation. I think in the movie we see another agent following Tom around quite a bit. Don't hear anything. Also a former insurance salesman who posed as an insurance salesman so he could get in with the population there and gain their confidence. Then an American, a person of American Indian descent, Ute Indian, John Wren. He was one time spy for the Mexico revolutionary leaders. He was not good at filing reports, but he posed as an herbal doctor and was able to get in close with the Osage people and gain their confidence as an herbal doctor. Then there were two others on this team, a former New Mexico sheriff, a former Texas ranger. One was an oil prospector, one was a cattle buyer. I'm not sure which was which. Okay, now we're starting the Tom White investigation. This is Henry Roan, January 23, died from a gunshot. He was depicted in the movie. Tom White selected, designated to be command field officer. This is 1-year tenure. He gets to work pretty fast, and within 6 months, he's got an indictment for Hale and Burkhart. Burkhart being married to Molly. And apparently Burkhart is talking because he develops quite a bit of information, does lead to prosecution. The prosecution of Hale, he's arrested January 26th, January of 26. And he was tried for the murder of Henry Roan. And since Roan was under guardianship, he was considered a ward of the federal government. So therefore, the case could be tried in federal court. So the first trial was in August of 26, resulted in a hung jury, with 6 of the jurors accused of taking bribes, others were threatened and with death, and they couldn't convict him. So there was a second trial in Oklahoma City. Hale was convicted. However, on appeal, it was reversed on the basis that it was tried in the wrong federal court. So they retried him again in Guthrie, Oklahoma, resulting in a hung jury. Fourth trial, it finally worked. He was convicted in 29 and was sentenced to life in Leavenworth prison. You can see that's a good 2.5 years after Tom White's totally off the case. It took that long to get him put away. So, what was the effect of this case on national law enforcement? The Osage case became a showcase of the modern hero. It demonstrated to many around the country, and you recall what the country was like at that time, the need for national, more professional, scientifically skilled force. At that time, local sheriffs, state attorneys, attorney generals had investigated and had done nothing. Hoover he used this to create a pristine origin story, a founding mythology in which the Bureau, under his direction, had emerged from lawlessness and overcome the last wild American frontier. And how did he do that? Well, he shared case information with the press and sympathetic reporters. He touted advancements in technology, the fingerprint system. And he worked with radio program, the Lucky Strike Hour, to dramatize cases. I just saw that ran from 35 to 53 on the radio. I remember listening to this. And then it was on TV from 1950 to 59. Anybody else remember seeing any of those? TV. Well, this was a pristine story for the FBI. Was it a pristine story for the Osage? I think the one-word answer to that would be hardly. So this is just kind of a quick overview of unsolved cases. Remember that Tom White was present between mid-25 and 26. There were 13 other full-blood deaths between 21 and 23. That's before Tommy got there. Between 21 and 25, 73 Osage. Sybil Bolton, she is, I think, portrayed as Sarah Butler in the movie. That's what this was, the one killed in the front yard with her 16-year-old daughter. Her stepfather was Guardian A.T. Woodward. He inherited her head rights. Well, he also had 4 other Osage wards. All died under his watch. Eve's Tall Chief, death attributed to alcohol, but his family said he never did drink. Paul Peace, he reported that he was being poisoned. He felt like he was being poisoned. So just after he had vowed to disinherit and divorce his wife, he died in a hit-and-run car accident. Raymond Redcorn Sr. was poisoned in 31, so you can see this was well after Hale was convicted and Tom White had left the scene. 23 other murder cases associated with Hale. Of course, there's Oil Man McBride, Vaughn the attorney, Mary Lewis. This is a separate line of murder here with Charles Whitehorn, professional hit. That's a real sordid story. And we will go to discussion.
So just to add a couple of things to what Richard was saying. So when we go back to Sybil Bolton, I had mentioned that so this is, you can't really see it, maybe I'll pass it around. It's her on the front. She's the one who's shot in the chest with her 16-month-old daughter. Her daughter obviously grows up and does not realize that her mother was shot and finds out at 67. You heard me speak to that earlier. Her son at the time, so her mother is 67, her son is 40-ish. He is a journalist for the Washington Post. So he also at that time finds out that he's half Osage. She was taught not to speak of it, and had a very, very difficult childhood. This is the daughter who grows up and then of course marries, and I'm sorry too. And the interesting thing is that because Dennis is a journalist and his mother wants to really find out what happened to her mother or his grandmother. Was she really murdered, or was it suicide? He investigates it. And being that he's a journalist for the Washington Post, he's just a few blocks down from the FBI building. So he actually has access to the FBI documents on this particular, on the Osage case. 3,000 pages of information was gathered at the time. This is what I thought was fascinating. Not one interview from an Osage Indian in all of that documentation during that time. So was captured. I'm sure they were interviewed, they just didn't capture it. So again, also documents were falsified, destroyed. So a lot of what individuals are trying to do is they're interviewing families and trying to get, stories. And in the community, what's interesting is you have people living side by side that their ancestors were involved in this. Some on one side, some on the other. And as a community, they're working through it. But as we all know, all of us read the book because, I know I had heard from some friends, you should read this book, it's great. And of course, you know the story, I read it, now I'm here. But again, great book, so please, if you're still interested in what's going on, I don't know if this library has it, but it is, or I'll read it and donate it, but it definitely is another story. And I think that's what's also so interesting is that there are other family stories. If we really think about it, the Killers of the Flower Moon, it's basically one family. You think about it. There's a lot of other families, there's a lot of other books. Dennis McCullough was asked in his interview, he's like, well, aren't you really sad you didn't write your book any earlier? Because he actually had done all the research and was ready. And David Grant, of course, wrote his book and got it out, and of course, I think got all the awards. But nonetheless, it's supposedly a wonderful read. Here's another one. It's a pipe for February. It is about the murder. The main character is John Great Eagle. I think you might have had Great Eagle up there. But this book is written from an Osage point of view. So again, another story, another sad story. But nonetheless, it's our history. So we're going to talk a little bit. We've talked a lot. I know we're getting short on time, but we would like for you all to talk. So, yes.
My question is that do you know if there's any deaths in the last 40 years about these head rights? Any families? It's that the head rights are probably one of the things that's underlying causes.
I'm not aware of any.
I don't know, but one of the things though is that the value of the head right has diminished considerably.
As the amount of oil diminishes and the number of things happen. Okay.
Yeah. So it wouldn't pay to murder, for just a pittance. That's just off the top of my head. I don't know, but I haven't heard anything.
They did diminish quite a bit as far as what the value of it was compared to what it is.
The reason why I asked that is because, the head rights actually associates with all minerals.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we know there's not gold there, but there's a big amount of lithium. And, that's another thing that's coming. And the reason why I'm asking this question is, could we see another version of this coming up? Because here we go, we're now back into all the electric cars. Now we're moving electric car manufacturing and battery companies here. Well, guess where they're getting a lot of their lithium? In China. We need the lithiums to happen here. And now we got to find that local mineral. And they have. And a lot of it is in Oklahoma.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that, we were going to ask the question, and either, we'll go through the slide here in a minute, but, this isn't taught in school. And, if we don't figure out how to get this voice out there, history, unfortunately, is known to repeat itself. And so I know, what do you all think about that?
First, I don't think Crazy Horse was crazy. I think he was just really ticked off.
And then, in the book it talks about Burkhart or Anne Hart,
after they were put away, they really kind of diminished all of these things. But the doctors that, gave the poison to these people were never prosecuted. So this probably could have gone on for several more years without any documentation.
Doctors were also known to sterilize younger women so that they wouldn't have children to pass those headrights on to. That was the other thing I discovered, which is also kind of
Are any of you
gut-wrenching.
gonna cover, anything about the author and how he got interested in this?
Let me think, because they asked David Gran in the, he didn't know much about Oklahoma. He had kind of heard through the grapevine that this was something that might be of interest to him. He was also a journalist. He actually went to Oklahoma, and in fact, I heard this today on a podcast, where he went to Oklahoma, he met with a few people, and his eyes were opened and realized there's truly a story here. So,
And I think another thing, if any of you want to research this or anything somewhat related to this, one of the national repositories of our archives and documents is in Fort Worth. And he came to Fort Worth and did a lot of his search and research there. So, and anyone can go there if you know what you're looking for.
if you're up in Norman, go to the library. I saw a lot of information that I could get through the Norman University of Oklahoma Library. So I thought that was interesting as well. But of course, they own headrights, so there you go.
I was lucky or unlucky enough to live in Bartlesville, Oklahoma 2 times. And not only that, I was able to work in the Pawhuska ISD as a speech-language pathologist, and I also did the Osage pre-K, and I also worked for the Department of Human Services at one point, and back and forth to Fairfax. So, the
Did
book
you know
and the...
about this?
Pardon?
Did you know about any of this?
Did you know about it?
None. But after reading the book, and I love to read history, and it really brought home the fact that it's not a local. I mean, when you travel, you go to Peru, and who builds these big churches that, the Spanish came in, they took it from the Indians. You go to, we were in Tahiti, and the tour guide loved to make the point to us Americans that, well, the French Catholics came in, and we would not go to church on Sunday, so what did they do? They took all of the boats, which happened to be the livelihood of the Tahitians, and burned them. So it's a human tragedy that we cannot stop ourselves from wanting and, well, not wanting, but to be able to restrain ourselves in a way in which we do not do severe damage to